Hi, everyone, and welcome to the inaugural edition of the Allison Sports and Harris Pulse Sports Momentum Index video podcast. I'm Shane Wynn with Allison Sports, and I'm joined today by Jen Musil, who is Managing Director of the Sports Division of the Harris Poll. Hey, Jen, how you doing?
Hey, doing well. How are you?
Awesome. And my partner in arms, Shane Arman, who is Senior Vice President here at Allison Sports. How you doing, man?
Doing great.
Awesome. So, what are we talking about? We're talking about the Sports Momentum Index, and this is going to be a monthly poll that we are fielding jointly between the two agencies that really was born out of this realization that there is this new explosion of popularity of sports, and a lot of sports that you would have considered to be fringe sports a few years ago are really coming into the public consciousness. And of course, women's sports, and we're seeing explosion in that like I don't think we've really seen in history before. And we all got together and felt like we needed to create something that put a data lens on all of this so that we could see where the momentum is and why it's there. Jen, let's talk a little bit about what this poll is. What is the index?
Yeah, so the Sports Momentum Index, when we have questions like this at the Harris Poll, we talk to Americans, we do polls. That's kind of who we are. So this is at its heart, it's really a poll of, a broad swath of Americans spanning age groups, cohorts, race, ethnicity. And it's looking at a variety of sports and sports leagues, both really well established, kind of more new. As you mentioned, Shane, we've included quite a few historically fringe sports as well, and a lot of women's sports to really understand where is the momentum and where are there big opportunities for brands and athletes and all of those players. And so the index really has three core components that we found emerged as being really critical to driving momentum across leagues. So it's personal relevance is the first one, which is really, do you identify with this sport? Is it something, right, that you have some sort of personal connection to? And there's a few metrics that gather that. The second piece is around engagement. That's what it sounds like. You want to watch it. You'd watch more if you could. You really want to lean into that sport or that league. And then the third piece is cultural currency, which is really the buzz around the leagues that you're, kind of what's that chatter, what's in the news cycle, what are people really talking about around the water cooler. And so we put those three components into an index so we get a really nice way to compare across leagues. And we also capture some other metrics around fandom and how the growing size of fan bases. But for the most part, the index is those three core things are really the drivers.
Armin, I touched on it a little bit in the intro here on kind of the why, but maybe give us a little bit better understanding of like, why did we do this? What were we aiming at?
Yeah, so I think the best way to frame it up is if you look at all the stakeholders in the sports industry, whether you're, a chief marketing officer, whether you're an agent with athletes who you're trying to pitch to a brand, or you're a team or a league and you're trying to bring in sponsors, it all really centers around the fan. And there's no other tool out there that really blends together this unique measure of personal relevance, engagement, and cultural currency. And so to be able to bring those three together and provide unique data in a space where not only is data really the gold mine that all of these stakeholders are using to make really big, impactful decisions, at this moment in time, there are more investment league sponsorship opportunities than there ever have been before. Yeah. New leagues are starting right and left. And so how do you possibly make a decision? This data and this poll is going to help all of those audiences do that. That's why we created it.
Yeah, I'm sure that there's a lot of marketers out there representing brands that want to either put their toe in the water in sports, or they already are in, and they're looking for new ways of going in. And you're right, there's probably not a lot of data out there. We know that available for a marketer to be able to say, I want to invest in this, and I can see that it's got momentum. I know where the momentum is, who it's with, why it's there, and can start to prove out, right, the ROI, which is kind of the key here, right? Yeah, so let's get into the inaugural edition here. Jen, let's start at the top. Let's talk about the top 5 sports and leagues that we saw in the initial poll.
Yeah, for sure. I'm going to talk about the top six because there's kind of
How
a
about
tie and in the fifth place. But it's really what Shane hit on, which is there's a lot of emerging
it?
leagues, and we're seeing that a lot of those leagues command a lot of the momentum at the moment. So the top leagues that we're seeing, number one in terms of momentum, is professional pickleball. So across a lot of generations, a lot of different swaths of society, pickleball's got a lot of momentum. Number two behind pickleball is the brand new Professional Women's Hockey League. So they came in
Amazing.
second in their first season in terms of momentum. Number three is American flag football. We've, heard a lot about flag football becoming an Olympic sport and collegiate flag football for women. So there's a lot of momentum behind flag football. So that's number three. Number four is professional lacrosse, actually.
Cool.
Is definitely having a moment. We're seeing that's really buzzing a lot of millennial parents, but broader than that too, because they're five kind of across the board. And then, four, and then tied for the number fifth spot, surprised me a little bit. World professional surfing is number five. And equal with that is the NFL. So, the NFL was sort of the one really historic legacy league that popped in kind of that top in the index. But the rest of them are definitely newer and or kind of more niche leagues, which was really exciting to see because it does speak to how many opportunities are really out there. And, there is a lot of place for marketers to play in this.
Armin, I wonder about, seeing the NFL come in at 5 or 6 versus some of these other sports that are pretty niche. Like, what is that telling us about where the fandom's sitting right now?
Yeah, I think a couple of things. I mean, obviously timing is a consideration. We did take the poll back in February, so we're kind of getting into the off season, but we also know the NFL is really a year-round sport. These other emerging sports, I think there's just something interesting about, you look at surfing, right? Like there's a buildup there. Looking ahead to the Paris Olympics, surfing is in the competition. So that's sort of right in the center of the conversation. Pickleball has been there for quite a while. You have celebrities investing in teams. You have, big tournaments and all of those things. And I think the leagues are doing a better job. Like maybe fans are just getting a little bit tired of the same old and want something a little more catered to their own interests.
Yeah. Yeah. And when speaking of that, each month, what we're going to be doing is spotlighting something that has relevance in time and space. And for this inaugural edition, we are going to highlight the WNBA, which just began its season a few weeks ago. And we've got brand new data around that. And Jen, I'm going to turn it over to you to show people a little bit of the momentum that we're seeing in WNBA this year.
Yeah, the WNBA is a really cool story. So, like we said, we did the initial data poll in February, and the WNBA had strong momentum. It was sort of in the middle, in the mix. It certainly was not low. But since then, we had March Madness, right? And we had the Caitlin Clark, all of that conversation. We had the WNBA draft, and then the season actually started. And we took the most recent poll was this past weekend. So right during, second week of the season. And we see really, really clear increases in momentum in the WNBA. So we're talking double-digit % increases in terms of, the percentage of people who say that they like to talk about the WNBA with their families and with their family and friends. We see big increases across engagement, relevancy, and cultural currency. All three, the league really moved very, very clearly over the past couple of months. And so it's exciting to be able to quantify that thing that we all were sort of feeling, but it's like, hey, it's real. Here's where it's happening, right? And here's who it's among. And the interesting thing I think about who it's among is it's really, really widespread. We're seeing big momentum increases. It is not just women. It's not just, historically powerhouse basketball regions. It's really the WNBA has sort of captured momentum really nationwide, which is
I was in Iowa over the weekend. My brother's oldest son is graduating high school. He's going to go to the University of Iowa. They're in Cedar Rapids. They've been following Caitlin Clark in Iowa the whole time. And I'm talking to my brother's father-in-law, who is, you know, a aging white male. And I'm like, what are you doing? What are you doing now? And he's like, oh, I'm watching all the Fever games. I'm like, really? You are? And he's like, absolutely. He's like, I'm not watching all the WNBA, but he's like, I'm a huge Caitlin Clark fan, and I'm watching the games. And I mean, I think we're seeing that, you know, across the board. So, you know, it's good to have that demographic information to be able to see that, like, it's not just young women that are driving the momentum behind that at all.
Absolutely.
I want to stay on women's sports for a second, because you mentioned earlier hockey, and I think we've got some kind of interesting data around that as well that's worth highlighting.
Yeah, Professional Women's Hockey League in their first season, right? So first time we took a look at them was kind of early on, right? Second month or so of their season. And then again, now they're in the playoffs. So the championship game is actually the evening we're recording this. But over the weekend, we collected some more data during the playoffs, and we're really seeing some interesting dynamics with women's hockey, which is that we didn't see big changes over time in terms of the percentage of Americans who are familiar with the league. It's, you know, about 2/3, and it stayed about 2/3. But what we did see is pretty significant increases in the percent of those who identify as fans. So like 8-point increases in terms of people who are saying like, yeah, I'm a fan of professional women's hockey, which is pretty meaningful. And we can also see some really, you know, probably expected, but kind of cool regional differences too, right? So if you look at the index scores for women's hockey nationwide, it's about a 56. If you look at it just in the Northeast, it's closer to a 65, which is where 5 of the 6 teams are located. And so again, this poll, you know, allows us to kind of slice and dice the data in, you know, regionally, demographically, you know, however you might like, to really, to your point in the initial, you know, kind of intro, Shane, of understanding where momentum is and who it's among. And so brands can really be strategic about capitalizing on it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's so important for marketers who may only have a geographic footprint in a certain part of the country, or for an agent who may have an athlete who was born in a certain region. Like, that's super, you know, interesting data. And, you know, I love the example of the Pro Women's Hockey League, because you talk about these numbers and they are really impressive. I mean, you're talking about just 6 teams in this league. They're playing 72 games this year, but like, they already have sponsors on the board like Tim Hortons and Molson and Canada Tire and even Barbie. They've drew 400,000 people, you know, into the stands in their first season. Their ownership model is a little bit different. They have the Dodgers chair who owns all the teams. There's no private investment. There's no individual owners of teams. So it's interesting to look at a league like that, doing it a little bit differently and also hitting high on this momentum index.
Yeah.
So, you know, Jen, we were just talking a little bit about the generational effect, and I know that we've got data coming out of the poll that looks a little bit more broadly at where some of that momentum is as well.
Yeah, this was really interesting to me. So, you know, when we look at Gen Z, millennials, they tend to have a little bit more momentum across leagues, right? These are just, right, you know, we kind of call millennial parents, after we were looking at this data, like the super fans. They're excited about a lot of sports that their kids play. But when you look at just overall momentum, when you look at boomers, you start to see some really big changes in the top 5. So the top 5 that I, you know, mentioned earlier really hold across, you know, all the way Gen Z, millennial, Gen X. They kind of mix up order and maybe 1 or 2 swap out. But those niche leagues really are present. The prevalence of women's sports is really there across those generational cohorts. When you get to boomers, you see a really different list. So their list is predominantly, or if not exclusively, really well-established leagues. So it's NFL, it's MLB, it's men's NCAA basketball, it's NHL, and then sort of squeaking in, I think at number 5 is maybe the Women's Hockey League, but the Professional Women's Hockey League. But it's very much more the mainstay sports that have the generation, or have the momentum among that generation.
Yeah, I would imagine that the younger generations have more appetite for consumption of content across myriad platforms than older generations do. And the fact that you're seeing women's and emerging sports actually getting airtime and media time and YouTube's a big part of that, and TikTok and everything. That's got to explain some of that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And that's one of the metrics actually that we're capturing within the index is like, would I watch more of this if I could? Because we know that a lot of these sports, right? You don't just turn on, linear TV and see a lot of professional lacrosse matches or, a lot of surf competitions. You really have to be on those other platforms or kind of looking for it. And so I do think there's probably a dynamic there too about media consumption, and that's impacting where they perceive momentum to
Absolutely. Well, look, this was a great first Sports Momentum Index run that we did. We're going to do this monthly. And we're going to record this podcast monthly, highlighting all these results. And if you have an interest in further looks into some of the data, that's also available. And, you can reach us at either Harris or Allison. With Harris, it's sports@harrispoll.com. With Allison, it's sports@AllisonWorldwide.com. Feel free to send us an email and let's have a conversation about that. Until next month, I'm Shane Wynn, and thank you to Mr. Armin and Jen for joining us on this podcast. Look forward to talking to you again next month.
Yeah, sounds great.
Thanks.